Hi, welcome to another episode of Dr. Cammy Goes Keto, where I'm working on transitioning to a keto lifestyle from the standard American diet. Been off of the standard American diet for a while and dealing with keto and now some carnivore. And I'm here with the wonderful Mike Collins, the sugar-free man who runs sugardetox.com and has a wonderful 30-day challenge to pull off the sugar, which I highly recommend if you think that sugar is something that you are struggling with. Thanks for being here, Mike.
Always a pleasure, Dr. Cammy. Always a pleasure.
I love that. You always say that. It's really nice. It feels really good. Thank you. So I'm pretty mad right now. I'm really, really pissed. And before we went on the air, I was saying I was fucking pissed. And that's really the way I feel right now because, well, for a lot of different reasons. One is that I'm really making full on 110% the commitment to pull off with sugar, flour, and caffeine. I'm on like day 6 or something. I'm on my last day of a decaffeinated cup of coffee, which I'll have the last one tomorrow and be done with that. I'm really mad that it took me this long to really make a 110% commitment and to really be willing to deal with the feelings and emotions that are going to come up that I think I've been kind of not looking forward to dealing with and that I've been putting off. And I think that completely pulling off of all the mind altering stuff is going to really help me. You know, I was telling Mike before we started filming that in July I went without caffeine for a month, and then when I drank a cup of coffee at the beginning of August, I felt like I was on crystal meth or cocaine or something. I was high as a kite after one cup of coffee. And I never really believed you, Mike, when you said how sensitive I probably was to that caffeine. And then when I got it out of my system for a month and drank one cup of coffee, I was up for 2 days. And so I really believe you now. And I believe that I'm just really ultra sensitive to things. And so I'm really mad that I'm just having to deal with this. I'm really upset and mad about how I was saying for the last year and a half or whatever, or 2 years since I've been trying to get off the sugar, that I'm off of the sugar and flour. And even when I went off of the sugar and flour completely for 47 days, which I kept track of, I think I was still messing with some caffeine in there. So being completely off of everything 110% this is the first time I'm really doing it. So we're going to see what happens. The other thing that makes me mad is that when I bring this up, thank you, when I bring this up to people, they don't believe that I'm going to be able to do it. And, you know, I don't blame them because for how long have I been talking that I'm not doing this? But people that are really close to me and have been saying that, you know, they're just, they believe that I can do it. Like they believe that if I make the decision, I can do it, but they don't know that I'm going to actually do it. And so that's been making me really mad too. And even somebody that's really close to me was saying how when she restricts herself, you know, when she gets so restricted, part of her wants to rebel and just say, well, um, I'm not going to do that, you know, just rebel and say, oh, screw that. I'm not going to listen to that. And I was trying to explain to her, well, you know, because she's in my AA program, and I was explaining to her, well, you know, it's like the alcohol, you know, on week 3, after you started eating, after you stop drinking the alcohol and your mind says, oh yeah, you can just go have a couple of beers with your friends or whatever it was that your mind is saying to you. You didn't say to yourself, oh yeah, you know, that's okay. Just this once. You know, you said no fucking way, and you just made sure that you weren't going to do that no matter what. And that's the part that really scares me is that, you know, ever since I sobered up, I've been using sugar in my back pocket. I had a little sugar something in my back pocket so that in order for me not to drink, I would just have a little bit of sugar. And when my son passed away, it was a lot of sugar. And so now I feel like I don't have anything in my back pocket, you know, and I feel like I'm just going to have to start carrying around some Kleenex, you know, because of all the crying that's going to be going on.
Well, thanks for being transparent about this because, look, as I told you before, like, and I want to reassure the audience that at the bottom line, almost no one just says one day I'm going to quit and then quits all 3 of these things. It's, you know, my story is, you know, years and decades ago, but it took me a year to get off caffeine. And if someone's going to do this, you did a little bit in reverse, but, you know, you were trying them all at the same time, which is admirable. And I would suggest this order if someone's going to try it by themselves. But it took me a year, probably longer than a year, to get off of caffeine, and then another year to get off of sugar, and then another year to get off flour. So the whole total was 3 years before I was flour, sugar, caffeine free. And in that structure, you really do need the sugar acts as a little bit of methadone for the caffeine, and then the flour acts as a little methadone for the sugar. So you're stepping down. Now, that said, like, you can just rip the Band-Aid off and do it, but you have to realize that there's going to be the work that you and I have essentially been doing during, since this podcast began, which is the emotional work. It's all going to hit you at once. And the bottom line is nobody just shows up. We used to say this when I would go to 12-step meetings and stuff, is like, you didn't have much of a problem if you just showed up and never used again, or never, you know what I mean? And so you are just doing what everyone does. In our program, we've got thousands and thousands of people in it. Problem is only not that many active at any given time. But come January, like a gym in January, they come flooding back, right? So people, like, they just take time. It takes time um, to work through the issues, the emotions that you've blunted. I mean, I think it's very telling that you had, and this is in the big book of AA, page 163, top of 164, that you're supposed, you can use sugar to help you get off it. So that's one of the problems I have, no outside science, and that's just ridiculous. So here you are, recovering from alcoholism, and you have I love the back door, or the sneak, or whatever you call it, in your back pocket, and you have the sugar, and so you're easing into the sugar as you sober up or whatever, right? So you're basically stepping into that addiction more, and using more. And then your son passed away, and there's a lot of sugar, right? And like, the parallels are unbelievably uncanny, how they are really. I've said this 100 times, and I'll keep saying it. I think I've got to learn what my shall we say, sound bites are, and this one is one of the most important of them all, is that sugar gets no respect as a drug that can stunt and block emotions. Like I always say, that the emotional eating folks, they got about half the equation right, but they don't believe in 100% abstinence. What 100% abstinence brings on is what you have in that 47 days and the times that you've relapsed. It brings on the emotions that you never dealt with, the whole, all of your recovering days since you were a child. Literally, you've had sugar in one form or another, whether it's alcohol or sugar or whatever. And so here you are, facing down, and caffeine was added to this. It's a long story about an Olympic athlete who we couldn't get off sugar until we discovered they were giving her caffeine at 10 for performance in the pool. And we added that to the program because it's wired together, fired together. Chocolate and tea and coffee are all wired together. And so at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're now facing the emotions. And I think you're cognizant of that, and you're aware of that. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what you're saying, you're ready. You're ready to, and the sneak word is good, because we all addicts want a back door. They want an escape hatch. They want a way out. They want to keep it in their back pocket, whether it's coffee or decaf, or what gum you were just recently gave up some gum. There's always something that, no sugar addict or alcoholic comes to me and wants to do 100% abstinence at the beginning. What they want to be taught is how to use what is, and this is a stupid word, but normally, what they consider normally, what they see other people be, they think they're able to do it, but they're not. Behind the scenes, they're, doing the same thing. They're just quiet about it. They're not like you are, facing it head on. So, I think the hard part about this is to give yourself some grace, some slack for what I think, and we can probably talk about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, your perceived weakness, your perceived inability to do this when your intellect says you want to, right? So you're fighting biological urges of dopamine blasts, and you're just, you can't win that battle. You've got to hold tight in that first 30 days, that first 60 days, and then you'll be able to, there'll be less need for instant gratification. You'll be able to think it through. You'll say, well, I've lost 12 pounds. I haven't had sugar in 30 days. I think, I'll call Mike or I'll call one of my friends and my cravings. The cravings don't go away for a year or two, like the emotional cravings, not necessarily physical at that point. They're the I'm stressed, I'm nervous, I'm depressed, I'm angry. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say I'm stressed, I'm nervous, I'm angry, I need sugar. It says wouldn't some sugar. It's a craving. It's a weird physical need.
It's like seductive.
Yeah, very seductive, very quiet, again, it'll be maybe not in my lifetime where we'll be able to understand how the deep limbic brain can transmit the need for a dopamine hit into a thought that sounds rational and logical to the addict. It's like, well, a little soda won't hurt this. So, yeah, I mean, I think the most long answer and the most message in there is to cut yourself a break and let's just start again and let's get.
But see, I don't like that. That scares me to cut myself a break because when I cut myself a break,
Yeah.
I feel like that's the door opening. That's that voice in my head going, cut yourself a break, Cammy. You can just have a couple of pieces of gum after your dinner. And, like I didn't realize how much I was chewing gum after I was eating my meals. And I really was, because when I got it completely out of the house, I wanted it really bad and it wasn't there. And I still want it bad. I'm really craving it badly after I eat. And so that when you're, that's why I feel like I have to be like, just get off of everything for 90 days and just get yourself clean, because the voice in my head is so sneaky and so persistent. And, and it's me, right? The voice is me. Like it is me. It's in my head. And so I'm thinking if I go off of everything completely, then that voice will be something I'll be able to like confront or talk with or come to terms with, or, saying you're not going to get it. So, crave away, say whatever you're going to say, but you're not going to get it. And then it's going to like stomp and scream and have a tantrum. And then, it's going to calm down. I mean, I don't know.
Right. I think there's a unique thing about gum, to be honest with you. I don't know if you've heard this research, and I ended up doing it. I got a tick now that I do when I'm watching TV or driving or something. It's like that the chewing and because it is kind of rest and digest, but this kind of fake chewing where I go like this or something. It's like I'm exercising my jaw, right? And so you're getting that hit of sweetness and you're getting that jaw exercise, which is calming your vagus nerve. And you're getting that kind of sweet, whatever it is, that chemical experiment that is sweetened, because you're not using sugared gum, you're using sugar-free gum,
Yeah, which has sweetener in it. For me, it's anything sweet.
Yeah, I mean, so there's just...
Except for blueberries and maybe green apple, I don't know.
Right. So kind of a double whammy there. That's why and what's happening, and we talked about this earlier, is that even with the decaf that you're about to give up, I don't care, like you get down to 1 decaf a day. When you go 0 decaf a day, it's like orders of magnitude. I guess what I'm trying to say is like tapering doesn't really help much in either one of these: sugar, caffeine, even sweeteners. And, it doesn't really help, because the difference between someone who tapered and someone who just goes cold turkey is almost negligible. And the reason I know this is because I've done it with so many people who've done both multiple times. I've done, like I quit cold turkey this time and I tapered down that time. And then there's like 5 more episodes or failures or whatever. And they're like, I say, is there any difference? He's not really, there's no difference. No matter, it's that little niggling of the nucleus accumbens and the dopamine receptors. It's just that keeps the cravings alive. It doesn't matter how small it is. And that's why abstinence works. It just, I don't like to scare people, and I don't think I'm scaring you, but I think the audience needs to know that this idea of, Mike, do I have to do this for the rest of my life? This zero tolerance, this no, this 100% abstinence is, look, you've done everything on the planet, like cabbage soup diets and speed pills and whatever, exercise yourself to death. Nothing's worked. You're an adult, and 60 to 90 days of trying this just to see. And moreover than trying it, to have the support of what will happen during those 60 or 90 days in the change in your emotional life and the brain, as I said, the irrational, rational thoughts that are created that this is okay, that you have to fight against. And yet this is you fighting against you. And you're like, what the hell? You know what I mean? I'm brilliant, brilliant. And, like you, it's like brilliant brain power, but it can't fight against that biological need for dopamine, because dopamine is, it's the learning mechanism. And you learned, your brain was wired when you were a child with 7 or 8 kids, however many you had, and you were like striving for attention, and you learned and wired that thing in, and now it's just wired. There's this deep groove, this deep pathway that when there's frustration, when there's worry, fear, guilt, anger, whatever, your body just goes, your brain just goes to that groove, and that groove requires more dopamine producing substances because you can't produce it on your own. What you need is to have a snowfall cover up that thing, and now you've got straight powder to go build another pathway to follow your, to change the behavior you have around these products. So it's hard. I mean, uh, um, and I think every day I do this, I know the emotional part is hard, but the biochemical, physical, biological functions are driving it, right? Yes, you're covering up emotions, but you're driving it with something that was created to find food and sex and make the species. It's like you touch your hand at on a hot stove at 4 years old, right? You don't do that now because that wiring that happened, that learning wiring is
Mhm.
still with you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And what's with you emotionally right now is that a little bit of sugar, a little bit of caffeine, a little chocolate, whatever, will stop whatever you're worrying about, afraid of, emotional about. You know what I mean? It'll stop it for 20 or 30 minutes, and then you'll have to re-ingest. That brain, your brain is wired that way. And rewiring, it takes
Mhm.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been, like you said, it's been that way forever. And I'm just feel really ready. I'm so sick and tired of being sick and tired of not being able to get this done. And I can feel it chemically in my body. Like when I eat sugar, it's this whole, it's so chemical. It's such a process that goes on in my body. And now it takes a long time to flush it out too, you know? Like, I'll eat off plan for a meal, and
Yeah.
then it'll take 4 days, 5 days to flush it out.
Gets worse. It does. The process, it's harder. We talked about this, I think, on another event, another podcast. Is like people don't talk about progressive illness much anymore. But it's like you never stopped. Your reaction, your body's reaction was like you never stopped. You pick up right where you would have left off if you still used. And that's why it's harder, it's just hard.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, is that when I started this channel, when Karen and I started this channel, um, we were starting out on this ketogenic lifestyle and food plan and getting the standard American diet out of our system because we knew it was so bad for us. And I had no idea that that sugar was going to be so hard to get out for me. I
Yeah.
realized that I was having troubles with sugar like 2 months into the food plan when I was eating the Atkins peanut butter cups that were full of maltitol or whatever it is, the sweetener, and I was eating, 6, 7 of them instead of 1 or maybe 2. And I noticed that there was, addictive type of eating around it. And I was like, it looks like it's a problem for me.
Yeah.
So I had no idea. it was just all kinds of food at the time. And then when I got down to really looking at and evaluating what was happening, it was sugar, it was flour, and it's carbohydrates too for me. Like when I go low carb, the more carnivore I go, the easier and better it is,
Mm.
for my body to feel good and to think straight and to be happy. And, like this morning I had sardines with bacon, and that's what makes me happy, which I can't believe because I don't really necessarily like eating sardines. I don't really like the way they taste yet, but I'm getting, at first it was one bite and then I could have two bites. And
Yeah.
now I can eat a whole can with a lot of bacon on it and, know that maybe it's not the best thing in the world. I'm not craving it, but it makes me feel so good. And I know that it's taking good care of myself. And that's what I tell people when people are like, what are you doing with your life now that I'm not practicing medicine anymore because of my shoulder? I said, I'm working on taking good care of myself. I'm learning how to take good care of myself. And when I was 8 years old, I was cut loose from my parents. I mean, the other kids had to call their parents and tell them where they were, and I didn't have to. I just had to show up for dinner at 6 o'clock
Mm.
and I was fine. So I've been taking care of myself and a bunch of other people too. Well, and as for a profession, but taking care of myself since I was 8 years old,
Yep.
but not healthy care, not good care.
Right.
There was a lot of dysfunction there, emotionally, physically, just addiction type of behavior. So I thought it would take me 3 months to learn how to take good care of myself. And now I'm on year 3. I'm actually on year 4, I think.
That's a lifetime process for sure. It does. It takes time to rewire what happened to you and all that. It does. It takes time. I could definitely relate to what you're talking about. You know, your that book I was telling you about, fawning, is like this kind of taking care of others at the expense of yourself and the lack of self care. There's almost a feeling of guilt when you begin the process of taking care of yourself. It's ridiculous. It shouldn't be that way. I still struggle with it. I still struggle with what do I want to do? What would make me happy as opposed to what would make other people happy, or people around me happy. So yeah, it's
Right.
yeah.
Right. And, getting along with others is important, but, saying what, your needs are and having, making sure that those are met. And,
Feel a little selfish, right?
yeah, well, it's interesting too. I feel a little guilt like the other day because I'm on day 6 or whatever of no caffeinated coffee. And
Mm.
I've been sleeping. I told Mike before we started filming, I've been sleeping. Like I went to bed last night at 7:23 p.m. and I slept through the whole night till, a quarter to 6 this morning,
Yep.
So um
I
yeah.
do want to tell you, and this is very real. I don't think we've ever discussed it on this, but I run a caffeine group and I used to belong to a larger caffeine group. I think this is important for our folks to hear. It's a long story, but the larger caffeine, somehow I must have said something about something that they didn't like and they bounced me out of it. But it's got about 5,000 people in it. And mine is getting to that point. It's got like 1,000. And the bottom line is that when you listen to people who have really, these are people that are still using sugar. Amazingly enough, they're not focused on that part of their life. The withdrawals from caffeine are really difficult for a lot of people. Sometimes it takes 4 or 5 or 6 months for the sun to come back out. It's like a methamphetamine withdrawal because you've burned out your endorphins and your dopamine receptors, as we talked about before. So the caffeine thing, in as sensitive as I believe you are, and your coffee description of going whatever time you were without it and then having one and then being lit up like a Christmas tree, that lends me to believe that you possibly could be, your level and I want to make things perfectly clear for you and for the audience is that level of sensitivity I think of as a superpower, not as a detriment, not as something that's bad. I think of it as good. But when it's attached to these substances, it can become a problem, and changing from them. I mean, they say, even heroin, once you get your detox and stuff, but the recovery from methamphetamine, cocaine, speed, that kind of stuff, crystal meth, is long and arduous because you have that anhedonia, you have that inability to feel joy. And so it takes a long time to rewire your brain and get the new grooves and new pathways built. And so I just want to warn you that, there might be even a little more difficulty coming, but I want you to kind of focus on that it's physical, it's physical. And then that, you were honest enough before we started that there may be like a real letting go of the emotions. Let me think here. So the boys are about 3 and I took you. So I was 5 years sober and I had quit, everything. And when I moved out of the house, I quit flour, my last one, and television, threw the television against the fireplace. And so here I was, and television is for me, and still is literally 30, 40 years later, one of the most difficult things for me to just put down. So I'd stopped completely and all hell broke through emotionally. You know what I mean? That was one of my dark night of the soul happened, minus the flower and the television. And so this process, this living in process that I described, you might be right there. And our goal, you and I together and our community is to quantify this, to make it somewhere where we know it's about to happen. Because most people, me for sure, and you wouldn't sign up if we were to tell them what's about to happen. And I think, I'll be here for you. Our community will be here for you. But if that begins to happen, you just need to, lean into it and do the crying that's necessary and feel the emotions that are necessary. And I think that the caffeine for you might be the final straw. You know what I mean? It was for that Olympian, the person that, we worked for 6 months. This woman actually placed in the Olympics and she could do anything with her body. She was still thin. She was still swimming in 40. She was a chiropractor. She was brilliant, and she traveled all over the world helping other people do a chiropractic. It's a long story, but the short version is it was the caffeine that was holding her back from sugar and flour recovery, right?
Mhm. Well, that's why I'm interested in doing this all at once because I think that that's what's been going on with me. I think I've been continuing to struggle with the sugar and the flour because I still have this caffeine just hovering around, here and there, just sprinkling it in,
Yeah.
and then when I don't hold the reins on it, I sprinkle it in more and more and more, and so it's an
It's
addiction.
like the gum, you substitute it,
I think it's just easier to improve myself emotionally and spiritually. I feel like I just need to do this physically.
Mm,
I feel like it's holding me back
right.
from my potential.
I love that when you get to that point. I think that's super important when you get to that point. At some point, I'm not a big fan of the word or construct of bottoms, but there is a point where, you're drawing your line in the sand, you're just done. And then there needs to be, I think, not a bad fear, like if you get an accidental ingestion or something, but there needs to be a healthy fear around these quote unquote legal substances that you don't. My phrase is, I don't want to die with my music in me, meaning I believe that those products for me stunt everything. They make me fearful, worried, anxious, feelings that are useless because they're not logical. They're not like based in any kind of reality. It's just a lack of brain reward chemicals. And this is why I think the metabolic health and metabolic psychiatry stuff is ascending so much. Is like you've literally destroyed's a strong word, but you have at least the very least rewired and depleted your mitochondrial power and strength, for your whole body and your brain and your feel good, serotonin, everything beyond dopamine, oxytocin, everything is affected. And you just can't get up and get the motivation to do and feel positive. And that's
Mhm.
really threatening or really debilitating is a better word. It's debilitating in,
Mhm.
in in your drive to not die with your music in you, to not, and my fear, and maybe I'll hopefully, because you seem to be a very similar person, is like I'll do my only once in a while tough love is like, you will not achieve your highest potential on this stuff, period. You're just not going to happen. It's not going to manifest the things that you can do. You were young, you were healthy, you had more brain reward chemicals when you muscled yourself to a medical degree and you know what I mean? You like said, fuck it, I'm getting this. I'm doing this, right? And you were able to do it, even though you may have been dabbling in some of these substances.
Oh,
You,
yeah,
you weren't,
yeah.
you weren't depleted. Now you're older, you've beat up your brain and wired your brain, and it's just going to be harder for the next 30 years to achieve the things that you want to achieve and manifest the life that you want to manifest, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Exactly. So, and we're not gonna, so I just want to say that I really appreciate you helping me through this whole transition, and we'll see what folds out. I mean, part of me is very frightened, part of me is very frustrated, and ready to move forward no matter what's coming,
Right.
because I'm just ready for it. I'm just making myself ready. Part of me looks at it as an adventure, part of me is very scared and frightened, and part of me is hoping that people learning through what I'm going through and relating will help other people too.
Yes, and they absolutely will. They absolutely will be helped by your candor, your transparency, your honesty about what's actually going on. You know, I was so amazed when I first walked into any kind of 12 step or any kind of recovery room. I had never heard people speak this way, where they were telling about what's really going on in their life. And I'm talking lawyers, doctors, judges,
Mhm.
people that you'd always looked up to and whatever, and they're talking similar to the way we're talking today, that all of that meant nothing because they couldn't stay off the booze or the drugs, and this is the case here. They couldn't, you're not going to be able to reach your highest and best self, and it could be nobody cares, nobody knows, and I don't care. Nobody knows, like, why. Like, this is just what is. It's not something I'm trying to take away from the audience or you. I don't want them to think of the deprivation that because the amount of joy that the
Mhm.
abstinence brings, if I can only transmit it in from my brain into anyone's, yeah, I mean, that's the goal, but that's kind of hard. It's impossible, I guess. I can't do a Mr. Spock mind meld just yet. So
Well, that's why we'll talk about it.
yeah, we'll talk about if you keep talking about it and working it out, One of the sad parts about working with the Olympian that time is that I never got to go through what I know most of my clients go through, which is the emotional part of it, you know? So she got, I don't know, like 30 days and she said, finally, she figured it out. You know what I mean? But I think there was probably more later. So I don't know. Anyway, I think you're going to do this. You are doing this. And any of the setbacks are just, they're not a death sentence.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks so much for listening and subscribe and comment. We're interested in knowing, what you think about our video here, and we'll see you next time.
See you, gang.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Bye.